Section 1. The door swings open. The evening has grown cold around you, and the last gray light of day is fading behind the hills as you walk along the rutted dirt road. Your feet ache. You have been traveling since dawn, moving through a landscape of bare fields and skeletal trees, past villages where smoke rises from thatched roofs and the smell of peat fires hangs in the still air. Your cloak, which seemed warm enough when you set out this morning, has proven inadequate against the creeping chill that comes with sunset in this season. The wool is damp from a brief rain that caught you mid-afternoon, and it clings to your shoulders with an unpleasant heaviness. You can feel the cold working its way into your bones, settling into your joints, making every step just a little more difficult than the last. You need shelter. You need warmth. You need rest. And then you see it, just ahead, where the road bends slightly. A building larger than the cottages you have passed. The glow is golden and flickering, candlelight or firelight, and it seems to pulse with warmth and life. As you draw closer, you can hear sounds drifting out into the quiet evening voices, laughter, the clatter of wooden vessels. A sign hangs above the door, creaking gently in the wind. Though in the dim light you cannot quite make out what image is painted upon it, it does not matter. You know what this place is. You have been hoping to find such an establishment before full dark caught you on the road, with nowhere safe to sleep. You stand for a moment outside the door, gathering yourself. The door itself is made of thick oak planks, darkened with age, and the oils of countless hands pushing it open over the years. The wood is swollen with moisture, warped slightly in its frame, and you can see that the iron hinges are spotted with rust. This is not a grand establishment. This is not a place where nobles rest on their journeys between castles. This is a common tavern, a place for ordinary people, for farmers and merchants and pilgrims and wanderers like yourself. You place your hand against the wood. It is cold beneath your palm, cold and slightly damp, and you can feel the grain of it, the roughness, where the surface has weathered over many seasons. You push, and the door groans in protest, a low creaking sound that seems to announce your arrival to everyone within. Immediately, a wave of warmth rushes out to greet you, and you feel it wash over your face like a blessing. The contrast with the cold night air is so stark that for a moment you simply stand there in the doorway, letting the heat soak into your chilled skin. Your eyes, adjusted to the darkness outside, struggle with the sudden flickering brightness within. Shapes move in the golden haze. Shadows dance on walls darkened by years of smoke. Slowly, slowly, the scene before you begins to resolve into something comprehensible. The smell hits you next. It is complex, layered, overwhelming in its richness. The dominant note is wood smoke, sharp and acrid, pouring from a fire that burns in a large hearth at the center of the room. There is no proper chimney here, just a hole in the roof through which the smoke is meant to escape, though clearly much of it lingers, hanging in a haze near the blackened rafters. Beneath the smoke, you detect other smells, the yeasty, slightly sour temps of ale, both fresh and spilled, and long since soaked into every wooden surface. Something savory is cooking somewhere, meat and onions and herbs bubbling in a pot. But there are less pleasant notes woven through this tapestry of aromas as well. The smell of bodies, many bodies, pressed together in a confined space. bodies that have labored in fields and walked long roads and have not seen a bath in weeks. The earthy, almost mushroom-like scent of damp wool drying by the fire. And beneath it all, rising from the floor itself, something organic and old and faintly rotten. You step inside fully now, letting the door swing closed behind you. The sound it makes, as it settles back into its frame, seems to seal you into this world, separating you from the cold darkness outside. You are committed now. You are here. And so you take a moment to simply observe, to let your senses adjust, to understand the space you have entered. The room is larger than you expected, though the ceiling is low, making it feel close and intimate despite its size. The walls are made of wattle and daub, a lattice of woven sticks covered with a mixture of mud and straw that has been whitewashed at some point in the past. Though the white has long since yellowed and darkened with smoke stains, rough wooden beams support the ceiling, and from these beams hang various objects: dried herbs, a few smoked fish, what looks like a ham wrapped in cloth. The floor beneath your feet is packed earth covered with rushes, dried reeds and grasses strewn about to provide some cushioning and insulation. You can feel them crunch and shift beneath your boots as you take a few tentative steps further into the room. The fire draws your eye and holds it. It is the heart of this place, the source of warmth and light around which everything else revolves. The hearth is simply a raised platform of stones in the center of the room, and upon it burns a substantial fire of logs and branches, flames leaping and crackling, sending sparks spiraling upward. Around the hearth, people have gathered, some sitting on low stools, others standing with their backs to the flames, warming themselves. Their faces are lit from below by the firelight, casting strange shadows upward, making their features seem to flicker and shift. You see a young man with a patchy beard, laughing at something his companion has said. You see an older woman with gray hair tucked beneath a linen cap, her eyes half closed as she holds her hands toward the warmth beyond the immediate circle of the fire. The room extends into dimmer regions, lit only by the occasional tallow candle sputtering on a table. You see benches and trestle tables arranged somewhat haphazardly, some occupied by groups of people eating and drinking, others empty and waiting. Against one wall, a long counter serves as a bar of sorts, behind which a woman stands, watching you with an appraising eye. She is perhaps 40 years of age, with a broad face and strong arms, and an expression that suggests she has seen every kind of person walk through that door and is not easily impressed. Behind her, you can glimpse barrels stacked against the wall, and shelves holding an assortment of cups and jugs and vessels. The noise of the place fills your ears now that you are inside. It is not a roar exactly, not deafening, but it is constant and pervasive background hum of human activity. Conversations overlap and intertwine, most of them too distant or too muddled for you to make out specific words. Someone is laughing, a full-bellied sound of genuine amusement. Somewhere, a cup is set down heavily on a table. Near the fire, a man is telling a story, his voice rising and falling with practiced rhythm, though you cannot quite catch the thread of his tale. And beneath it all, a kind of creaking, settling, living sound, the building itself, the fire, the movement of bodies. the small adjustments and shifts of a space that is very much alive, you realize you are still standing near the entrance, still hovering uncertainly like a stranger unsure of their welcome. And you are a stranger here, of course. You do not know these people. You do not know this town or village, if it even has a name. You are merely a traveler passing through, seeking shelter for the night, a meal to fill your belly, perhaps a cup of ale to warm you from the inside. This is what taverns are for. This is why they exist. And so, gathering your courage and your composure, you begin to make your way further into the room, looking for an empty spot where you might sit and rest your weary legs. The woman behind the counter watches you approach, and you see her eyes taking in the details of your appearance, your damp cloak, your muddy boots, the tiredness that surely shows on your face. She nods once, a small acknowledgement, and gestures with her chin toward an empty section of bench near the wall. You nod back in gratitude and make your way there, stepping carefully around a dog that lies sleeping near the fire, its legs twitching as it dreams of chasing something through fields. You settle onto the bench, feeling the rough wood beneath you, and for the first time in many hours, you allow yourself to simply stop. You are here. You are warm. You are safe, at least for this night. And as the sounds and smells and sights of the tavern wash over you, you begin to let go of the weariness of the road, letting yourself sink into this moment, this place, this small pocket of warmth and life in the vast darkness of the medieval night. What exactly was a tavern? Now that you have settled onto your bench, your back against the rough wall, and the warmth of the fire reaching you, even here in the dimmer edges of the room, you have time to think about where exactly you find yourself. This is a tavern, yes, but what does that truly mean? In this age, in this world, so different from anything you might know, the places where people gather to drink and eat and seek shelter are not all the same. There are distinctions, categories, a hierarchy of establishments that would have been immediately clear to anyone living in this time, even if the differences might seem subtle or confusing to a modern observer. Let us begin with the humblest of these establishments, the alehouse. An alehouse is not really a public house at all, in the way we might understand it. It is simply a home, an ordinary dwelling, where a woman has brewed a batch of ale and is selling it to her neighbors. You might walk down a narrow lane in any village and see a pole stuck out above a doorway, sometimes with a bush or a bundle of leaves tied to the end. This is the ale's take, and it serves as a sign, an announcement to passers-by that fresh ale is available within. The woman inside is called an alewife or a brewster, and she has likely brewed this ale herself in her own kitchen, using her own equipment, following recipes passed down through generations of women in her family. These alehouses are everywhere. In a village of any size, there might be several women brewing and selling ale at any given time, competing for customers, each with her own reputation for quality or quantity or fair dealing. The brewing is done in small batches, because ale without hops does not keep long. Within a few days it begins to sour, to go off, to become undrinkable. And so the alewife brews frequently, perhaps every week, perhaps more often if her ale is popular and sells quickly. The customers who come to her door are her neighbors, people she knows, people who live and work alongside her in the daily rhythms of village life. They bring their own cups sometimes, or they drink from vessels the alewife provides, sitting in her home, perhaps on a bench by her fire, drinking and talking and passing the time. The establishment you find yourself in tonight, however, is something more than a simple alehouse. This is a tavern, and the distinction matters. A tavern serves wine as well as ale, and wine is a more expensive, more prestigious drink. Wine must be imported, brought in barrels from the vineyards of France, or the Rhineland, or other distant regions where grapes grow well. It cannot be produced locally in most of England, and so it carries with it an air of sophistication, of worldliness, of connection to places far away. A tavern that serves wine attracts a slightly different clientele than an alehouse merchants, travelers, minor officials, people with a bit more money to spend, and perhaps a bit more pretension to status. The woman behind the counter here, the one who gestured you toward your seat, is the tavern keeper. She may own this establishment outright, or she may run it on behalf of a husband or a landlord, but regardless of the precise arrangement, she is clearly in charge. You can see it in the way the others defer to her, in the authority with which she moves behind her counter, in the sharp eye she keeps on everything happening in the room. Running a tavern is hard work, demanding work, and it falls disproportionately on women in this era. The brewing of ale, the preparation of food, the management of customers and servants and supplies, all of this requires skill and stamina and a certain toughness of character that you can see clearly in this woman's bearing. There is another type of establishment you should understand, though this one is not quite that. An inn is larger and more formal than either an alehouse or a tavern. An inn offers lodging, proper beds, in private or semi-private rooms, stabling for horses, meals served at regular hours. Inns cater primarily to travelers, to people on the move, rather than to locals looking for a drink after a day's work. They are found along major roads, in market towns, in places where commerce and pilgrimage bring a steady stream of strangers needing shelter. The innkeeper is often a person of some standing in the community, and the inn itself may be a substantial building, 2 or 3 stories tall, with a courtyard for horses and wagons. This tavern falls somewhere between the humble alehouse and the proper inn. It serves ale and wine. It provides food. It offers a place to sleep, though not in private rooms, merely here in the common area, on benches, or on the floor, near the fire, alongside all the other travelers who have found their way to this refuge. It is neither the poorest nor the grandest of establishments. It is simply a tavern, a place where ordinary people come to drink and eat and talk and rest, a place that has existed in one form or another for as long as people have gathered in communities and needed somewhere to gather. You should know that these places are not unregulated. The authorities, the lord of the manor, the town council, the officials appointed by the crown, take a keen interest in the sale of ale and wine. There is something called the assize of ale, a set of regulations that date back many years, and that attempt to control the price and quality of the ale sold throughout the realm. The assize sets standards: how much a gallon of ale should cost, what ingredients may be used, how the measures should be calibrated to ensure that customers receive fair quantity. Alewives and tavern keepers are required to follow these rules. and officials called ale-conners are appointed to enforce them. The ale-conner is a curious figure. His job is to visit the alehouses and taverns in his jurisdiction, to taste the ale being sold, and to verify that it meets the standards of the assize. There are stories, perhaps apocryphal, about how ale-conners test the quality of ale. One tale claims that they pour ale on a wooden bench and sit in it, and if their leather breeches stick to the bench when they try to rise, the ale has too much sugar and is therefore adulterated. Whether or not this particular method was ever actually used, the point is that the brewing and selling of ale was serious business, subject to oversight and regulation, not simply a free-for-all where anyone could sell anything they pleased. Violations of the assize could result in fines, and the records of manor courts from this period are full of women being fined for selling ale that was too weak, or too expensive, or measured in vessels that were smaller than they should have been. Some historians have noted that these fines seem to have been almost routine, charged so regularly that they functioned almost like a licensing fee, way for the authorities to extract revenue from the ale trade rather than a genuine attempt to enforce quality standards. But the regulations existed nonetheless, and they remind us that even in this seemingly chaotic and unregulated world, there were rules, there were authorities, there were attempts to impose order on the machinations of daily life. The woman behind the counter in this tavern has no doubt dealt with ale-conners and their inspections. She has no doubt paid her share of fines over the years, whether for genuine violations or simply as the cost of doing business. She has navigated the complex relationships between tavern keepers and local authorities, between the need to make a living and the demands of those who hold power over her. And she has survived, clearly, has built this establishment and kept it running, has earned a reputation sufficient to draw travelers, like yourself, through that heavy wooden door on cold evenings like this one. If you have enjoyed learning about these distinctions, about the different types of drinking establishments in medieval England, perhaps you might take a moment to consider what surprises you most about this world. Did you know, before tonight, that so many of these places were run by women? Did you understand the regulations and oversight that governed even this humble trade? Think about it as you sit here on your bench, as the fire crackles and the conversations hum around you. And if you find yourself curious to learn more, to continue this journey into the past, know that there is much more to discover about this place, this night, this world that is so different from your own, and yet so recognizably human. The smell of the place. Let us speak now about something that you have surely noticed since the moment you stepped through that heavy door. Something that has been present in every breath you have drawn since entering this tavern. The smell, it surrounds you, permeates everything, fills your nostrils, and settles into your clothing and your hair until you know you will carry traces of it with you when you leave. It is not one smell but many, layered and intertwined, a complex tapestry of aromas, both pleasant and profoundly otherwise. And if you truly wish to understand what it was like to spend an evening in a medieval tavern, you must reckon with this sensory reality, must try to imagine or remember or accept a world in which such smells were simply the ordinary background of daily existence. The first and most dominant smell is the smoke, the fire that burns in the center of this room, the fire that provides light and warmth and the means of cooking food, produces a constant stream of smoke that rises toward the ceiling and is meant to escape through a hole in the roof. But smoke does not behave so obediently. It swirls and eddies and spreads throughout the room, filling the air with a haze that stings your eyes and catches in your throat. The wood being burned is whatever was available: oak, ash, elm, scraps and branches gathered from the forest or purchased from woodcutters. Some of it is dry and well seasoned, burning cleanly with minimal smoke. Some of it is damp, green, freshly cut, and it hisses and sputters and produces thick gray clouds that hang heavy in the still air of the tavern. Over time, this smoke has seeped into everything. The wooden beams that support the ceiling are blackened with generations of soot. The walls, once whitewashed, are now stained a dingy yellow-brown. Even the faces of the people around you seem to carry a faint patina of smoke, a weathered quality that speaks to lives spent in rooms like this one, breathing air like this air. The smell of smoke is in your clothing now, worked into the fibers of your cloak and your tunic, and it will linger there for days, a souvenir of your visit that you did not ask for and cannot easily wash away. Beneath the smoke, you detect the smell of ale. It is everywhere in a place like this, in the barrels stacked behind the counter, in the cups and jugs from which people drink, in the spills that have soaked into the wooden tables and the earthen floor. Ale has a distinctive smell, yeasty and slightly sour, rich with the fermented sugars of grain. Fresh ale smells almost sweet, inviting, promising warmth and satisfaction. But ale that has been spilled and left to dry, ale that has accumulated in layers over weeks and months and years, takes on a different character, sharper, more acidic, vaguely unpleasant. The tables in this tavern have absorbed so much spilled ale that the wood itself seems to exude the smell, releasing it into the air with every jostle and every new spill. Now turn your attention to the floor beneath your feet, to those rushes that cover the packed earth. When fresh, rushes smell pleasant enough, green and slightly sweet. They are meant to provide cushioning and insulation, to keep the cold and damp of the earth at bay, to give the room a sense of domestic comfort. But rushes are rarely fresh in a place like this. They are expensive to replace, time-consuming to gather and spread, and so they tend to remain in place for weeks, sometimes months, accumulating the detritus of daily life in a public house. Think about what falls to the floor in a tavern: crumbs of bread and scraps of food dropped or discarded by diners, bones gnawed clean and tossed aside, spilled ale, of course, soaking into the rushes, ash and embers that escape from the fire, dogs wandering through, leaving their own contributions to the mix, cats hunting the mice and rats that are attracted by the food, and people who spit onto the floor as a matter of course, people who sometimes do not make it to the chamber pot in the corner before nature calls too urgently to be delayed. All of these things accumulate in the rushes, mixing together, breaking down slowly, creating a rich organic layer that the great humanist scholar Erasmus would later describe with evident disgust. Erasmus was writing about English homes and inns in the early 16th century, a bit later than our current evening, but not so different in its essential character. He described floors covered with rushes that concealed ancient spittle, vomit, the leakings of dogs, the remnants of fish, and other things not fit for mention. He was appalled, being accustomed to the cleaner standards of the Low Countries from which he came, and his description has been quoted many times as evidence of English filthiness. But we must be careful not to simply condemn. People in this age were not ignorant of cleanliness or indifferent to comfort. They simply lived within constraints that are difficult for us to fully appreciate, constraints of time, of resources, of knowledge about disease and hygiene that would not be developed for centuries yet. Add to all of this the smell of bodies. The people around you have been working in fields, in workshops, on roads. They have been sweating in clothes that are worn day after day, week after week, without washing. Bathing is a rarity, a special occasion rather than a daily practice. Water must be hauled from wells or rivers, heated over fires, poured into tubs that are themselves difficult to clean. Soap exists but is expensive, a luxury rather than a daily necessity. And so people smell. They smell of sweat and dirt and the particular human odor that accumulates on skin and hair and clothing over time. It is not that they do not notice or do not care, it is simply that everyone smells this way, and so the smell is unremarkable, a background constant rather than something to be commented upon. The damp wool of your own cloak is contributing to this olfactory landscape. Wet wool has a distinctive smell, lanolin and animal and something faintly sulfurous, and as it dries by the fire, the smell intensifies before it fades. Around you, others have hung cloaks and wraps near the flames to dry, and the combined smell of drying wool mingles with all the other odors in the room. It is not unpleasant exactly, but it is strong and earthy and adds another note to the complex chord of smells that defines this space. There are more pleasant smells as well, and you should not think that a medieval tavern was nothing but an assault on the senses. The food cooking over the fire sends its aromas wafting through the room, onions caramelizing, meat roasting, herbs releasing their essential oils into the steam. These smells cut through the smoke and the staleness and remind you that you are hungry, that your body needs nourishment, that soon you will have a hot meal to fill the emptiness in your belly. The smell of bread, even coarse brown bread made from rye or barley, is deeply comforting, speaking to some primal part of your brain that associates this aroma with home and safety and sustenance. And there is something else, too, something harder to define. The smell of life, perhaps. The smell of a space that is used, that is loved in its way, that shelters human beings through cold nights and brings them together in warmth and fellowship. It is not a clean smell, not a sanitized smell, but it is an honest smell, a real smell, the smell of how people actually lived in this age before modern plumbing and ventilation and the 1,000 small technologies that separate us from the rawness of physical existence. You grow accustomed to it. As you grow accustomed to anything, after a while, you stop noticing the smoke and the ale and the bodies. They become simply the air you breathe, the environment you inhabit, unremarkable because they are constant. Your nose, overwhelmed at first, begins to adapt, to filter out the background so that you can focus on what matters, the conversation at the next table, the warmth of the fire on your face, the anticipation of the meal to come. This is how the people around you experience this place. This is their normal, their everyday, and if you are to understand them, you must let it become your normal too, at least for this one night. But you grow used to it quickly, because the faces around you are far more interesting than the floor beneath your feet. Let us turn our attention now to the people who share this space with you. The men and women who have gathered in this tavern on this cold evening, each with their own story, their own reason for being here, their own small piece of the vast human tapestry of medieval life. The people you'd meet, you have found your seat on the rough wooden bench, your back against the wall, and now you have leisure to observe the people around you. This is perhaps the greatest pleasure of spending an evening in a place like this, the opportunity to watch and listen, to glimpse the lives of strangers, to feel yourself part of something larger than your own solitary journey. A tavern in medieval England is many things, but above all, it is a gathering place, a space where people come together across the boundaries that normally separate them, where for a few hours the rigid hierarchies of this society soften and blur in the flickering FIRELIGHT. Look first at the man sitting closest to you, just a few feet away on the same long bench. He is perhaps 30 years of age, though it is difficult to tell hard labor ages people quickly in this era. And a man of 30 might look 40 or 50 to modern eyes. His hands are large and rough, the skin cracked and calloused, the nails broken and dirty. These are the hands of a man who works the land, who spends his days behind a plow or wielding a scythe or digging in the hard earth. His clothing is simpler, rough wool tunic, much mended, in a color that might once have been brown or green, but has faded to an indeterminate gray. His leather shoes are worn thin at the soles, and you can see where he has patched them himself, clumsily but effectively. This man is a peasant, a villain perhaps, tied to the land of some local lord. He works from dawn to dusk most days, tending fields that are not his own, paying rent in labor and in kind, eking out a living that provides just enough to survive, but rarely more. And yet here he is tonight, in the tavern, with a cup of ale before him, and a look of weary contentment on his weathered face. Today was market day in the nearest town, and he walked the miles to sell a few surplus vegetables from his small garden. The coins he received are mostly spoken for taxes, tithes, debts, but a few pennies are his own, and he has chosen to spend them here, on this small pleasure, this brief escape from the endless cycle of toil beyond the peasant. Closer to the fire, a different sort of man holds court. He is better dressed in a wool tunic dyed a rich blue that speaks of expense, with leather boots that still have some shine to them. His hands are softer, his posture more confident, his voice louder as he speaks to the small group gathered around him. This is a merchant, a trader, a man who makes his living not by working the land, but by moving goods from place to place, buying where things are cheap and selling where they are dear. He has traveled far more widely than anyone else in this room, and he knows it. And he enjoys sharing his knowledge and his opinions with anyone who will listen. The merchant is talking about prices, the price of wool in Flanders, the price of spices coming through Venice, the price of everything that can be bought and sold across the kingdoms of Christendom. He speaks with authority and a certain condescension, enjoying the attention of the simpler folk around him. But he also brings news, and this is valuable currency in a world without newspapers or telegraphs or any reliable way for ordinary people to learn. what is happening beyond their immediate horizon. Wars, plagues, the doings of kings and nobles. The merchant has heard things, has seen things, and for the price of buying him an ale, you might learn something of the wider world. Near the fire, warming his feet, sits an older man whose clothing marks him as something different again. He wears a long robe of coarse brown wool, belted with a simple rope, and on his feet are sandals that seem inadequate for the cold weather. Most tellingly, he has a small badge pinned to his houda, tiny metal image that you recognize as a scallop shell, the symbol of St. James. This man is a pilgrim, a traveler on a sacred journey, moving from shrine to shrine in search of spiritual merit. He has been to Compostela, far away in Spain, to visit the tomb of the apostle, and now he makes his slow way home, stopping at every church and chapel along the route to pray and rest. Pilgrims like this are common on the roads of medieval England. Some are genuinely devout, seeking forgiveness for sins, or healing for ailments, or simply a closer connection to the divine. Others are more worldly, using the excuse of pilgrimage to escape from responsibilities at home, to see new places, to enjoy the relative freedom of the road. The Church encourages pilgrimage and provides infrastructure to support it, hospices and hospitals where pilgrims can find shelter. Traditions of charity that oblige good Christians to offer food and aid to those on sacred journeys. Whatever this particular pilgrim's motivations, he has earned his rest by the fire, and he sits now with eyes half closed, perhaps praying, perhaps simply enjoying the warmth at a table near the center of the room. A group of younger men are being rather louder than the rest. There are 4 of them, laborers by the look of their clothing and their physiques, and they have clearly been drinking for some time. They laugh and jostle one another, making jokes in the local dialect that you cannot quite follow, occasionally breaking into snatches of song. They are not malicious, not dangerous, just young men with a bit of money in their pockets and a desire to enjoy themselves before the morning brings them back to their work. The tavern keeper watches them with a practiced eye, ready to intervene if their high spirits tip over into genuine trouble. And then there are the women. You might have expected, perhaps, that a tavern would be a masculine space, a place where men gather while women remain at home. But this is not quite accurate. You have already noted the tavern keeper herself, the woman who runs this establishment with evident competence and authority. And she is not alone. At a table in the corner, 2 women sit together, sharing a jug of ale and speaking in low voices. One is perhaps the wife of the merchant, traveling with her husband for safety and companionship. The other is harder to place, perhaps a local woman, a widow or a spinster, who has come out for the evening to escape the loneliness of her own home. Women in medieval England did not live in complete seclusion from public life. They worked, often alongside men, in fields and markets and workshops. They owned property, ran businesses, participated in the economic life of their communities. They drank ale indeed. They were the primary brewers of ale, and many alewives were also their own best customers, sampling their product regularly and generously. The tavern was not exactly a space of equality between men and women, but neither was it entirely closed to feminine presence. There is one more woman you should notice, and here we must speak of something less comfortable. By the door, lingering in the shadows, a young woman stands alone. Her clothing is somewhat finer than you might expect, a bit of ribbon in her hair, a dress that shows more of her figure than is strictly respectable. She catches the eye of men who enter, offers small smiles, speaks in low voices to those who approach. You do not need to have the customs of this age explained to you to understand what services she might be offering. Prostitution was common in medieval towns, tolerated if not exactly approved, sometimes even regulated by local authorities who preferred to contain it rather than futilely attempting to eliminate it. Women turned to this work for many reasons: poverty, desperation, lack of other options, sometimes simply as a business decision in a world where women's economic opportunities were severely constrained. The Church condemned it as sinful, but the Church also recognized the fallen nature of humanity and the need for pragmatic accommodation. A tavern like this might or might not officially permit such activities on its premises, but the tavern keeper would be unusual indeed if she were unaware of what happened in the shadows. This, then, is the society gathered in this one room on this one evening: a peasant farmer, a traveling merchant, a religious pilgrim, young laborers seeking entertainment, women of various stations and circumstances, rich and poor, pious and worldly, respectable and otherwise, all brought together by the simple human need for shelter and warmth and companionship. The tavern is one of the few spaces in medieval life where such mixing can occur, where the rigid boundaries of class and status become slightly permeable, where a farmer might sit near a merchant and hear news of distant lands. As you look around at these faces, lit by firelight and candlelight, you might feel a sense of connection across the centuries. These are people, after all, not so different from people today. They have the same basic needs: food, shelter, warmth, company. They laugh at jokes, worry about money, enjoy a drink after a hard day's work. The externals of their lives are strange to you, but the interior experience, you suspect, is not so alien after all. Think about which of these people you might choose to sit beside, to strike up a conversation with, to share a cup of ale with: the weary farmer with his stories of the land, the worldly merchant with his news from afar, the pilgrim with his tales of distant shrines. Perhaps take a moment to imagine that conversation, to consider what you might ask and what you might learn. And if you find yourself curious to know more, to continue this evening's journey through the medieval tavern, know that there is still much to discover about the food and drink and customs of this time and place. What you'd drink and why water wasn't an option. Your throat is dry. You have been sitting here for a while now, taking in the sights and sounds and smells of the tavern, and you realize that you have not yet had anything to drink. The warmth of the room has begun to thaw, the chill that settled into your bones during your long walk, and now your body is making its needs known. You are thirsty, and so you catch the eye of the tavern keeper, raise a hand to signal your desire, and wait while she makes her way over to where you sit. What will you drink? In the world you have come from, you might ask for water without a second thought. Clean water flows from taps, is bottled and sold, is taken entirely for granted as safe and readily available. But here, in this medieval tavern, water is not a drink that anyone would order. It is not that water does not exist, of course. Rivers flow through the landscape. Wells have been dug in every village. Rain falls from the sky and collects in barrels and cisterns. Water is everywhere. But water is also dangerous. People in this age do not understand germs. They do not know about bacteria, about the microscopic organisms that can turn a seemingly clear and clean stream into a source of deadly disease. But they do understand, through generations of hard experience, that drinking water often leads to illness. They have seen the connection between certain wells and outbreaks of sickness. They have learned, without understanding the mechanism, that water cannot always be trusted. And so they drink other things, things that have been processed in ways that, unknown to them, kill the dangerous microorganisms that make water unsafe. The most common of these alternatives is ale. Ale is made from grain barley, usually, though other grains might be used when barley is scarce. The grain is soaked in water and allowed to germinate, beginning the process of converting its starches into sugars. Then it is dried and crushed and mixed with more water and boiled, creating a sweet liquid called wort. Yeast is added to the wort, though in this age the exact nature of yeast is not understood. People simply know that something must be added to make the ale ferment, and they use various methods to ensure that this mysterious agent is present. The mixture is left to ferment for a few days, and then it is ready to drink. The key word in that description, the word that matters most for health, is boiled. When the wort is boiled, any harmful organisms in the water are killed. The resulting ale is not sterile in a modern sense, but it is far safer to drink than the untreated water from which it was made. People of this age do not know why ale is safer than water, but they know that it is, and that knowledge is sufficient to shape their habits. The tavern keeper returns with a wooden cup, worn smooth by many hands, and sets it before you. You lift it to your lips and take a sip. The taste is nothing like any beer you have known. It is thick, almost chewy, with a sweetness that comes from the malt sugars that have not fully fermented. There is no bitterness, because hops are not yet commonly used in English brewing. They will come later, imported from the continent. But for now, ale is made without them. The flavor is rich and yeasty, almost like liquid bread, and there is a certain sourness beneath the sweetness that speaks to the rapid fermentation and the lack of preservatives. The alcohol content is low. This is important to understand, because when we hear that medieval people drank ale with every meal, at every opportunity throughout the day, we might imagine a society of perpetual drunkards. But ale of this sort contains perhaps 2 or 3% alcohol, sometimes even less, comparable to a very light modern beer, much weaker than wine or spirits. A person can drink several cups of this ale in the course of an evening without becoming seriously intoxicated. It provides hydration and calories and nutrition, and it does so without the dangers of water, and without rendering the drinker incapable of functioning. Indeed, ale is food as much as it is drink. In a world where calories are precious and often hard to come by, the sugars and carbohydrates in ale are valuable. Laborers drink ale because it gives them energy to work. Children drink ale, a weaker version called small ale, because it is safer than water and provides nourishment for growing bodies. Pregnant women drink ale, nursing mothers drink ale, the sick and the elderly drink ale. It is not a recreational indulgence, but a staple of daily life, as fundamental as bread. But this is a tavern, not a simple alehouse, and so other options are available. If you have the money, you might ask for wine. Wine is more expensive than ale, because it must be imported. The climate of England is not suitable for growing grapes in any quantity, and so wine must be brought from France or Spain or the Rhineland, shipped in barrels across the sea, and then transported over land to reach this small establishment. The cost of this transportation is added to the price, making wine a luxury that only the wealthier customers can regularly afford. The wine that is available here is probably not very good by modern standards. It has traveled far and been stored in conditions that are not ideal for preserving delicate flavors. It may be sour, acidic, harsh on the tongue, but it is wine nonetheless, and it carries with it a certain prestige, a suggestion of refinement and cosmopolitan taste. The merchant near the fire is drinking wine, you notice, making a point of it, ensuring that everyone sees the cup in his hand and understands that he can afford this small extravagance. There is another option, though it is not available everywhere and is viewed with some suspicion in certain quarters. Mead, made from fermented honey, is an ancient drink with deep roots in the cultures of Northern Europe. It is sweet and potent, more alcoholic than ale, with a flavor that varies depending on the honey used and the skill of the maker. Some taverns offer mead, especially in regions where beekeeping is common and honey is readily available. But mead is also associated with older traditions, with paganism perhaps, with customs that predate the Christian era, and so it carries certain ambiguous connotations. For now, you are content with your ale. You drink slowly, savoring the warmth that spreads through your chest, the way the liquid soothes your dry throat and settles comfortably in your stomach. Around you, others drink, as well, the farmer with his small cup, the laborers with their shared jug, the pilgrim sipping slowly by the fire. Drinking is a social activity, a communal ritual, a way of being together without necessarily having to talk. The cup passes from hand to hand, sometimes shared among friends or even strangers, a gesture of fellowship and trust. There are rules about drinking, customs that govern how one ought to behave in a tavern. You should not drink alone if you can help it. Drinking is meant to be done in company, and a person who drinks alone is regarded with some suspicion. You should offer to buy drinks for others, and accept when drinks are offered to you. You should not become so drunk that you cause trouble or cannot take care of yourself. Drunkenness is tolerated, even expected to some degree, but there are limits, and you should treat the tavern keeper and her establishment with respect, paying fairly for what you consume and not causing damage or disruption. The tavern keeper herself does not drink much while she works, or if she does, she hides it well. She needs her wits about her to manage this establishment, to keep track of who owes what, to maintain order among her customers, to ensure that the ale flows and the fire burns and everything runs as it should. But later, when the last customer has stumbled home or fallen asleep on a bench, she might allow herself a cup, sitting alone in the quieting room, enjoying the fruits of her labor in peace. The ale warms your belly, spreading a gentle heat through your core, and you find yourself relaxing more deeply into your seat. But it is not only drink that you need tonight. Your stomach has begun to make its emptiness known with urgent growls and cramps. You need food, and fortunately, as the smell drifting from somewhere behind the counter reminds you, food is available here as well. Let us turn our attention now to the meal you might expect in a tavern like this one. The food on your trencher, the smell has been teasing you since you walked through the door, something cooking over the fire. Meat and vegetables and herbs, sending their aromas through the smoky air to remind your body of its needs. You have been traveling all day on little more than a handful of bread eaten as you walked, and now your hunger has become insistent, demanding. You signal to the tavern keeper once more, and she nods in understanding. Food will come. What arrives a few minutes later is not served on a plate as you might expect. Instead, the tavern keeper sets before you a thick slab of bread, slightly stale, coarse, and dark in color. This is your trencher, your eating surface, the medieval equivalent of a plate. The bread is dense and holds its shape well, capable of absorbing juices and sauces without immediately falling apart. When your meal is finished, you might eat the trencher itself, now soaked with flavorful liquids, or you might leave it to be collected and given to the poor or fed to animals. Nothing is wasted in this world where food is precious. On top of your trencher, the tavern keeper has ladled a generous portion of pottage. Pottage is the common food of common people, a thick stew that can be made from almost anything available. The base is usually some combination of grains or legumes, barley, peas, beans, lentils simmered for hours until they break down into a thick, nourishing mass. To this are added whatever vegetables are in season or stored from the previous harvest: onions, leeks, cabbage, turnips, carrots, parsnips. Herbs provide flavor: thyme, sage, parsley. Whatever grows in the kitchen garden or can be gathered from the hedgerows. The pottage before you tonight includes some shreds of meat as well, a luxury that marks this as a tavern meal rather than the humbler fare you might find in a peasant cottage. The meat is probably pork, the most common meat in medieval England, salted to preserve it through the winter months. It is not a generous portion. Meat is expensive, and the tavern keeper must make her supplies stretch, but it is enough to add richness and depth to the stew. You see flecks of fat glistening on the surface, and your mouth waters in anticipation. You have no fork. The fork will not become common in England for several centuries yet. It is known as an Italian affectation, regarded with suspicion by sturdy English folk who see no need for such fussy implements. What you have is your fingers and a small knife that you carry at your belt. The knife is for cutting meat, cheese, bread, anything that needs to be divided into smaller pieces. Your fingers do the rest, scooping food to your mouth, pinching and grasping and conveying nourishment from trencher to lips. This is not considered rude or uncouth. Everyone eats this way. There are manners to be observed. Of course, you should not grab food greedily, should not take more than your share from communal dishes, should not lick your fingers too ostentatiously or wipe them on the tablecloth. But the basic act of eating with your hands is entirely normal and expected. You would be thought strange indeed if you demanded a fork. The pottage is hot and filling, warming you from within as the fire warms you from without. The flavors are simple but satisfying: the earthiness of the beans, the sweetness of the onions, the salty richness of the pork. You eat slowly, savoring each mouthful, letting the food settle into your empty stomach and begin the work of restoring your strength. This is not a refined meal, not a feast of delicate flavors and artistic presentation. It is fuel, sustenance, exactly what your body needs after a long day of walking. Beside your trencher, the tavern keeper has placed some additional items. There is a chunk of cheese, hard and sharp, its rind darkened with age. Cheese is a staple food, a way of preserving the nutrition of milk through the seasons when fresh milk is not available. It keeps well, travels well, provides protein and fat and salt. You cut off a piece with your knife and chew it slowly, appreciating the concentrated flavor. The way it contrasts with the soft warmth of the pottage. There is bread as well. Separate from your trencher, a small loaf, of course, brown bread, the kind that ordinary people eat every day. This bread is made from rye or barley, or a mixture of grains, ground into flour that retains much of the bran and germ. It is dense and chewy, with a flavor that is slightly sour from the fermentation of the dough. White bread, made from finely sifted wheat flour, exists but is expensive, a luxury for the wealthy. For common folk, brown bread is the norm, and you have learned to appreciate its honest, hearty character. A few onions sit beside the bread, raw and pungent. Onions are everywhere in medieval cooking. They are cheap, they grow easily, they store well through the winter, and they add flavor to almost anything. You bite into one and feel the sharp burn on your tongue, the way it clears your sinuses and brings tears to your eyes. Some people eat onions as we might eat apples, carrying them in their pockets and biting into them throughout the day. The smell of onions is always present in a medieval crowd, on breath and skin, part of the general olfactory landscape. If you were in a grander establishment, if you had more money to spend, you might have access to more exotic foods, roasted meats, perhaps a joint of beef or mutton turning on a spit over the fire. Fish, if you are near the coast or a river, fresh or dried or smoked. Pies, with elaborate crusts concealing fillings of meat and fruit and spices. But this is a common tavern, serving common travelers, and the food is accordingly simple. It is enough. It is more than enough. You eat until your belly is full and your body is satisfied, and you push away the remains of your trencher with a sigh of contentment. Around you, others are eating as well. The farmer has a bowl of pottage and nothing more, having spent his limited coins on ale rather than a full meal. The merchant has something finer, some roasted meat, some white bread, demonstrating his prosperity even in this small matter. The pilgrim eats bread and cheese and seems grateful for even this humble fare, accustomed as he is to the uncertainties of the road. Everyone eats with their hands. Everyone drinks ale with their meal. Everyone observes the basic courtesies of sharing a table with strangers. The act of eating together is important in ways that transcend mere nutrition. Sharing food creates bonds, establishes community, marks people as belonging to the same moment in the same place. Even in a tavern full of strangers, the communal experience of eating makes you all briefly kin, participants in a ritual as old as humanity itself. The fire crackles, the conversation hums, the food fills your belly and warms your spirit, and for this moment you are at home in this unfamiliar place. The filth beneath your feet. Let us speak now of something we have touched on already, but not fully explored: the filth. You have heard this word in the title of tonight's journey, and you have smelled hints of it since you arrived. But now it is time to look directly at the reality of sanitation, or the lack thereof, in a medieval tavern. This is not meant to disgust or to judge, but simply to understand. These were real places where real people spent their evenings. And if we want to truly imagine their experience, we must be honest about all of it, including the parts that modern sensibilities might find uncomfortable. Begin with the floor. You have been walking on it, sitting above it, for some time now, and perhaps you have tried not to think too much about what lies beneath the rushes under your feet. The rushes are meant to be a covering, a layer of insulation and cushioning over the packed earth beneath. Fresh rushes are pleasant green and sweet-smelling, soft underfoot, a small domestic comfort in a hard world. But fresh rushes cost money and effort. They must be gathered from riverbanks or marshes, dried, transported, spread. A tavern keeper must balance this expense against other demands on her limited resources, and so the rushes stay. They stay for weeks, sometimes months, accumulating the debris of daily life in a public house. Think about what falls to the floor over the course of an ordinary evening. Crumbs of bread, dropped or deliberately discarded. Bones from meat, gnawed clean and tossed aside when they can yield no more nourishment. Scraps of vegetables, peelings, the parts that no one wants to eat. Spilled ale and wine, soaking into the rushes and the earth beneath, drying into a sticky residue. Ash and embers from the fire, kicked across the floor by passing feet. The droppings of candles, sputtering tallow, congealing where it falls. Animals wander through this space as freely as humans. The dog you stepped over near the fire is not a pet in the modern sense, but a working animal, tolerated because it kills rats and provides some security. It eats scraps when it can find them, and it leaves its own contributions to the floor when nature calls. Cats prowl the shadows, hunting the mice that are inevitably attracted by the presence of food. Sometimes they catch their prey, sometimes they do not, but either way, they add their own droppings and urine to the mix. The rushes absorb it all, becoming over time a compressed layer of organic matter in various stages of decay. And then there are the humans. People in this age spit on the floor as a matter of course. It is not considered particularly rude or unusual. Saliva builds up in the mouth, and it must go somewhere, and the floor is as good a place as any. Phlegm, mucus, the various products of noses and throats, all of this ends up in the rushes underfoot. When people have been drinking heavily, accidents happen. Someone stumbles to the corner too late, cannot make it outside in time, adds their own liquid contribution to the floor. Vomit appears after particularly excessive evenings. The chamber pot in the corner exists for a reason, but not everyone uses it, and not everyone who uses it has perfect aim. The great scholar Erasmus, writing about English domestic habits, described floors that concealed remains of fish, fragments of food, bones, spittle, excrement of dogs and cats, stale beer, and other nameless filth. He was writing with the sensibilities of a continental humanist, accustomed to cleaner standards in the Low Countries, and his disgust was genuine. But we must be careful not to simply adopt his judgment as our own. He was observing a different world, with different possibilities and constraints, and the people who lived in that world were not morally inferior simply because their floors were dirty. Consider the context. Running water does not exist except in the natural form of rivers and streams. Sewage systems are primitive or non-existent. Waste goes into cesspits, into the streets, into the nearest body of water. Soap is expensive and not particularly effective by modern standards. Hot water requires fuel and labor to produce, and both are precious. The very concept of germs, of invisible organisms causing disease, will not be developed for centuries. People clean when they can, as they can, with the resources available to them. And if the result does not meet modern standards of hygiene, it is not because they are ignorant or careless, but because they are operating within severe limitations. And yet, even by the standards of the age, a tavern floor is recognized as particularly foul. The author of one medieval conduct book advises readers not to examine too closely what lies beneath the rushes in an inn, suggesting that the reality is best left uninvestigated. People knew that these floors were dirty. They simply accepted it as part of the experience, as one of the costs of seeking shelter and company in a public house. When the filth became truly unbearable, the rushes would be swept out and replaced. But this happened less often than modern sensibilities might demand. The fleas and lice deserve mention as well. These tiny creatures are constant companions for almost everyone in this age, regardless of social station. They live in clothing, in bedding, in the rushes on the floor, feeding on human blood and leaving itchy welts in their wake. People scratch constantly, unconsciously, a background activity so normal that it goes unremarked. The fleas jump from host to host, spreading wherever people gather, and a crowded tavern is an ideal environment for their proliferation. You have probably acquired some unwanted passengers simply by sitting here this evening, and you will carry them with you when you leave. The plague that has devastated Europe in recent memory travels with fleas to, though no one yet understands this connection. The Black Death killed perhaps a third of the population, and it came and went in waves, appearing and disappearing according to patterns that seemed random and terrifying. People tried everything to ward it off: prayers, herbs, fleeing from infected areas, but nothing seemed to work reliably. The fleas continued to bite, the rats continued to carry them, and death continued to strike without apparent logic. Even now, the threat of plague lingers in the collective memory, and any outbreak of sickness is watched with anxiety. But tonight, in this tavern, such fears seem distant. The fire is warm, the ale is flowing, the company is pleasant enough. Yes, the floor is filthy. Yes, fleas are biting your ankles even as you sit here. Yes, the smells are pungent and the sanitation is non-existent. But this is life, real life, lived by real people who loved and worked and laughed and suffered just as people do today. They were not diminished by their dirty floors. They were simply human, making their way through a world that offered challenges we can barely imagine. If you are enjoying this honest look at medieval life, take a moment to appreciate how far we have come and how much remains the same. Consider sharing your thoughts about what you have learned, perhaps the detail that surprised you most, or the aspect of this world that seems most alien or most familiar. And if you find value in these journeys into the past, know that there is more to discover about this evening in the tavern. When the night grew rowdy, the evening has deepened, and you notice a change in the atmosphere of the tavern. More people have arrived as the night has worn on. Workers finished with their daily labor, men seeking escape from cold homes, travelers stumbling in from the dark road outside. The fire has been built up again, sending fresh sparks spiraling toward the smoke hole. And the light seems brighter, more animated. The noise has increased as well, conversations growing louder, laughter more frequent and more raucous. Cups are filled and emptied and filled again. The mood has shifted from the quiet weariness of early evening to something more energetic, more unpredictable. This is when taverns can become dangerous. Not always, not inevitably, but the potential is there in the combination of alcohol and crowds and the various tensions that people carry with them into a public house. The farmer who seemed so peaceable earlier is arguing now with another man about some old grievance, their voices rising. The young laborers have grown louder and more boisterous, their jokes taking on an edge. In the corner where men have been gaming, you see money changing hands. And you see also the tight expressions that suggest not everyone is happy with how the evening's luck has fallen. The authorities who govern medieval towns are well aware of the problems that taverns can cause. They have passed regulations, so many regulations, trying to contain the worst excesses. Curfews require taverns to close at certain hours, typically when the church bells ring for Compline, the last service of the day. Tavern keepers are forbidden from serving known troublemakers, from allowing illegal gambling, from harboring criminals or prostitutes. Prices are regulated, measures standardized, quality controlled. On paper, the medieval tavern is one of the most heavily regulated institutions in town. In practice, enforcement is sporadic and inconsistent. The night watch may or may not make their rounds. The aleconner may or may not visit. Local officials may or may not care about violations, especially if they are receiving their share of the profits or are themselves among the customers. The regulations exist, but they are more honored in the breach than in the observance, and everyone involved understands this. Tavern keepers learn to manage their own establishments, to maintain order through force of personality and the threat of banishment, to call for help from neighbors or authorities only when truly necessary. The tavern keeper here is watching the room with a sharp eye, and you can see her making calculations. The argument between the farmer and his antagonist has grown heated. She moves toward them, interposes herself, speaks words you cannot hear but whose effect is immediate. The two men subside, glaring at each other but no longer shouting. She has diffused the situation for now, though the tension remains, and she will need to watch them for the rest of the evening. This is part of her job, perhaps the most difficult part, managing the volatile emotions of people who have been drinking in close quarters. Gambling is happening at several tables, despite the regulations against it. Men throw dice, play cards, make wagers on the outcomes. Some of these games are relatively innocent small stakes, friendly competition, a way to pass the time and add excitement to the evening. But other games are more serious, with real money at risk, and where real money is at risk, real conflict can follow. A man who loses more than he can afford may become desperate, may accuse his opponents of cheating, may decide that violence is preferable to admitting defeat. The tavern keeper watches the gaming tables as closely as she watches the rest of the room. And then there is the matter of sex. The young woman you noticed earlier, lingering by the door, has found a customer, one of the traveling merchants, you think, though in the dim light it is hard to be certain. They have slipped away together, perhaps to a private corner of the establishment. Prostitution is not exactly legal, but it is not exactly illegal either, existing in a gray zone of tolerance and regulation that varies from place to place. Some towns have official brothels, licensed and taxed, while others drive the trade underground but cannot truly eliminate it. The Church, of course, condemns all sexual activity outside of marriage as sinful. But the Church also recognizes that human nature is weak, that temptation is powerful, and that some accommodation must be made for the realities of a fallen world. Better, perhaps, that men satisfy their urges with professional women than that they assault respectable wives and daughters. This pragmatic attitude shapes official responses to prostitution, which is often tolerated as a necessary evil rather than vigorously prosecuted. A scuffle breaks out near the fire, not the argument you were watching before, but a different conflict, two of the young laborers grappling with each other over some perceived insult. One throws a punch, the other responds, and suddenly there is genuine violence in the room. The noise level spikes as people shout, some trying to separate the combatants, others encouraging them, others simply getting out of the way. A bench is overturned with a crash. A cup goes flying. The tavern keeper shouts for order, her voice cutting through the chaos. It is over quickly. Friends pull the fighters apart. The tavern keeper threatens to ban them both if they cannot behave themselves. The combatants, suddenly sobered by the reality of what they have done, apologize grudgingly and are separated to different parts of the room. The bench is righted. The spilled ale is left to soak into the rushes, and the normal hum of conversation resumes. This, too, is a common pattern, flare-ups of violence that burn hot and fast and then subside, leaving no lasting damage. But not all tavern fights end so harmlessly. The historical records are full of cases where arguments became assaults, where fists gave way to knives, where someone ended up dead on the floor while his killer fled into the night. Coroners' inquests describe victims of tavern violence stabbed, bludgeoned, struck with whatever weapon was at hand. The killers, when caught, face serious consequences. But catching them is not always possible, and even when it is, medieval justice can be arbitrary and unpredictable. For tonight, though, the worst seems to be over. The violence has subsided. The gamblers continue their games. The couples in the shadows continue their transactions. And the general population of the tavern continues to drink and talk and enjoy the warmth of the fire. This is the reality of a medieval tavernaut, constant chaos, but the ever-present possibility of chaos, a tension that runs beneath the surface of ordinary evening life. Most nights are peaceful. Most people come to drink and talk and rest, seeking nothing more than the simple pleasures of companionship and warmth. They tell stories, share news, complain about their work and their families and their neighbors. They sing songs, sometimes when someone with a good voice and a bit of courage leads the way. They play games that are not about money riddles, rhymes, contests of wit and memory. The tavern is a place of community, of connection, a refuge from the isolation that can otherwise characterize life in this scattered, rural society. The fire burns lower now, the flames dying down to glowing embers that pulse with gentle heat. The hour grows late, and the earlier energy is fading, replaced by a drowsy contentment. The loudest voices have quieted. The most volatile personalities have either calmed down or left. What remains is a room full of tired people, most of them well into their cups, preparing for sleep or the journey home. The tavern keeper makes her final rounds, settling accounts, clearing cups, banking the fire to last through the night. But eventually, the fire burns low, the candles gutter, and even the loudest voices grow quiet. The night deepens around the tavern, wrapping it in darkness, and you realize how tired you have become. Let us end this evening as it would have ended for any traveler in this age, stepping back out into the world beyond these walls. Closing time. Stepping back into the night, the tavern has grown quiet. The fire has burned down to embers, their glow casting a dim red light across the room. Most of the candles have been extinguished or have burned out on their own, and the darkness presses in from the corners, reclaiming the space that the evening's warmth and light had briefly held at bay. The noise that filled the air just hours ago has subsided to murmurs and soft breathing. People are settling in for sleep, wrapping themselves in cloaks, laying their heads on folded arms, making themselves as comfortable as possible on hard wooden benches. You could stay. This is what most travelers do, sleeping here in the common room alongside strangers, sharing the warmth of the dying fire, trusting the tavern keeper to watch over them through the dark hours. It would not be comfortable by modern standards. The bench is hard. The air is still thick with smoke and the smells of the evening, and you can hear someone already snoring loudly near the hearth. But it would be safe, or safe enough, and you would wake in the morning to find the fire rebuilt and perhaps some breakfast available before you continued on your way. But something draws you to the door. Perhaps you want a moment of fresh air before you sleep. Perhaps you want to see the sky, to breathe in the cold and the dark, and remember what world you have been sheltering from. Perhaps you simply want to end this evening the way it began, standing at the threshold between inside and outside, between warmth and cold, between company and solitude. You rise from your bench, your legs stiff from sitting so long, and you make your way carefully across the room, stepping over a sleeping dog, avoiding a man sprawled on the floor, navigating the dim maze of benches and tables. The door is still heavy, still groaning on its hinges as you push it open. The air that rushes in is shockingly cold after the warmth of the tavern, and you feel it bite into your face, your hands, any exposed skin. You step outside and let the door swing closed behind you, and for a moment you simply stand there, breathing, adjusting to the change. The sky above you is brilliant with stars. There is no light pollution here, no electric glow from cities and highways to wash out the heavens. The Milky Way arcs across the darkness, a river of light made up of countless individual points, more stars than you could ever count. The moon, if it is up tonight, casts silver light across the landscape, illuminating the road you traveled earlier, the fields beyond, the shapes of trees and buildings in shades of gray and black. The cold is real, sharp, immediate. But there is a beauty here that makes it almost worthwhile. You can hear the tavern behind you, muffled now through the closed door, the crackle of the dying fire, a cough, a murmur of conversation from the few who have not yet succumbed to sleep. And you can hear the night itself, sounds you did not notice when you arrived in your weariness. An owl calls from somewhere distant. A dog barks in the village. The wind moves through bare branches with a sound like whispered secrets. This is the medieval night, the darkness that descended every evening and held the world in its grip until dawn. People in this age have a different relationship with darkness than we do. They cannot banish it with a switch, cannot summon light whenever they wish. When the sun sets, darkness comes, and it stays until the sun rises again. Candles and fires provide small circles of illumination, islands of light in a sea of black. But beyond those circles, the darkness is absolute. You learn to move carefully in it, to trust your other senses, to accept that there are hours when you simply cannot see. You learn to fear it too, sometimes, because real dangers lurk in the dark wolves in some regions, bandits on the roads, simply the risk of falling or losing your way. And yet the darkness is also restful in its way. It enforces a rhythm of activity and rest that is tied to the natural world. When you cannot see to work, you sleep. When the light fails, you stop your labors and attend to other things: conversation, contemplation, the company of family or friends. The frenetic productivity of the modern world. The sense that there is always more to do and that darkness is merely an obstacle to be overcome does not exist here. The night is for rest, and people rest. Standing here outside the tavern, you think about what you have experienced this evening. The heavy door and the wave of warmth. The smells, smoke, ale, bodies, rushes, food. The people, the farmer, the merchant, the pilgrim, the laborers, the women, each with their own story and their own reason for seeking this place on this night. The ale, thick and sweet and nourishing. The food, simple and filling, eaten from a trencher with your fingers. The filth beneath your feet, the organic reality of a world without modern sanitation. The flare of violence, quickly subdued. The gambling and the sex and the complex human drama playing out in the firelight. Nothing remarkable happened, no great events, no historical turning points. Just people living their lives as people have always lived them, seeking warmth and food and company. Passing the time until morning came and they had to return to their labors. And yet there is something extraordinary in that ordinariness, something worth remembering about the countless millions of human beings who have lived and died without leaving any record of their existence, who have gathered in places like this one to share a cup and a story and the simple comfort of being among their own kind. You take one more breath of the cold night air, feeling it fill your lungs, feeling the contrast with the warm, heavy atmosphere you have just left. The stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns, the same stars that people have watched since the beginning of human time. The darkness is vast and quiet and somehow peaceful. Now that you have had your fill of warmth and company, you are ready to go back inside, to find your place on a bench, to wrap your cloak around you and let sleep come. Thank you for spending this time in the past, for walking through that heavy door and sitting by that smoky fire and eating from that stale trencher. Thank you for breathing the air of a medieval tavern, for seeing the faces in the firelight, for imagining yourself into a world so different from your own, and yet so recognizably human. These people were your ancestors, in some sense not necessarily by blood, but by the long chain of human experience that connects every generation to those that came before. Rest well tonight, wherever you are. Let the memory of the fire warm you, the taste of the ale linger, the soft hum of voices fade into the quiet of your own evening. And if you have found something valuable in this journey, something that has helped you see the past a little more clearly, or appreciate the present a little more fully, consider returning for another visit. There are many more stories to tell, many more evenings to spend in taverns and cottages and castles, many more lives to explore across the long centuries of human history. The door is still there, waiting for you. Whenever you are ready, you can push it open again, and the warmth will rush out to greet you, and the adventure will begin anew. But for now, sleep, rest, let the darkness hold you gently until morning comes and the world awakens again to light and labor and the eternal human business of living. Good night.